So we are going to the place of the peace covenant from Daniel chapter 9. Title of this message, Peace in Our Time. Of course, I took that, for those of you who understand history, from the words of Neville Chamberlain, peace for our time. Neville Chamberlain, peace for our time. The phrase peace for our time was spoken on September 30, 1938 by British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain in a speech concerning the Munich Agreement and the Anglo-German Declaration. The phrase echoed Benjamin Disraeli, who upon returning from Congress of Britain in 1878 stated, "I have returned from Germany with peace for our time." It is primarily remembered for its ironic value. Less than a year after the agreement, following continued aggression from Hitler and his invasion of Poland, Europe was plunged into World War II. How did it happen? Chamberlain landed at Heston Aerodrome on September 30, 1938, and he spoke to the crowds there, and this is what he said. "The settlement of the Czechoslovakian problem, which has now been achieved, is, in my view, only the prelude to a larger settlement in which all Europe may find peace. This morning, I had another talk with German Chancellor Herr Hitler, and here is the paper which bears his name, as well as mine. Some of you perhaps have already heard what it contains, but I would just like to read it to you. We regard the agreement signed last night and the Anglo-German naval agreement as symbolic of the desire of our two peoples never to go to war with one another again." Later that day, he stood outside 10 Downing Street and again read from the document and concluded, listen to this, "My good friends, for the second time in our history, a British Prime Minister has returned from Germany bringing peace with honor. I believe it is peace for our time. We thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Go home and get a good, nice, quiet sleep." That didn't work out very long, did it? Joel Rosenberg on his blog site wrote this week, "America, for all that we have endured, for all the grit and hard work required to come back, for all the tasks that lie ahead, know this, the shadow of crisis has passed, the state of the Union is strong." So began President Obama on Tuesday night in 2015 in his State of the Union address to the nation and to a joint session of Congress. He writes, "He was not the first American president to declare the State of the Union strong, but with all due respect, the president is wrong." He writes, "When a nation murders 57 million innocent babies, the State of the Union is not strong. When a nation overtaxes and overregulates and overburdens the economy and drives manufacturers and other businesses overseas and leaves 92 million Americans out of the labor force with no jobs and few prospects to get a good-paying job, the State of the Union is not strong. When a nation heaps $18 trillion of national debt on the backs of our children and grandchildren and keeps creating more and more national debt with no end in sight, the State of the Union is not strong. When a leader ignores the rising threat of radical Islam and does not take decisive action to stop Iran from developing nuclear weapons, does not take decisive action to crush terrorist movements like Al-Qaeda and ISIS, and refuses to even mention Islam or Islamism or radical Islam or even Al-Qaeda in his address to the nation, the State of the Union is not strong." He writes, "My goal in saying this is not to score partisan political points. Rather, I'm deeply concerned about the future of America, and Christian leaders and lay people must speak out." Peace in our time. We hear it preached in Washington. We're going to get there. We hear it preached in Europe. We're going to get there. Just ignore reality. And as we watch world events, you and I are racing toward a time when there will be a peace agreement in Israel. And some people think that it is coming, and they think it's coming this year. Now, I'm not so sure it's coming this year. I see things like this, and when I do my Bible prophecy search, and you see things like this, you think tribulation knocking. Israel asked for a 7-year peace treaty, which would usher in the Antichrist. All hell about to break loose as the blood moons rise. Run for your lives, right? And then you see the picture. Oh, it's ominous. Listen carefully, all right? It is coming. But you see that, and man, it can throw you into a mess. We want to get a good handle on things. And that is my intention here over the next few minutes that we have together. But there's a peace plan coming. It's going to seem good at first. It will be a confirmation of a 7-year peace plan, but 3.5 years into it, the Antichrist will break it. It's a deal with the devil. It's a peace initiative between the Antichrist and the Jews in Jerusalem, and it's also called the covenant with many. And I believe part of the many is not just the Muslim territory surrounding Israel, but I also believe it is a very good chance this covenant is going to be in agreement with America, whatever state America is in at that time, and Europe and the Western world. I can't see Russia being involved. Maybe they will or whatever, but nevertheless, the Muslim nations, and it appears the Western world. But the peace plan is coming. There's a lot of chatter about it, that it could be coming at the end of or before the end of 2015. So what I want to do, as I mentioned, is get a really good handle on it. So in Daniel chapter 9, we have this. The Bible says this, beginning in verse 20. Now, while I was speaking, praying, and confessing my sin and the sin of my people Israel, and presenting my supplication before the Lord my God for the holy mountain for my God, and of my God. Yes, while I was speaking in prayer, the man Gabriel, that'd be the angel, who appeared as a man, whom I have seen in the vision at the beginning, being caused to fly swiftly, he reached me about the time of the evening offering, and he informed me and talked with me and said, O Daniel, I have now come forth to give you skill to understand. Now, can you imagine that? You're sitting there praying, you've been waiting, give me understand. All of a sudden, there's this angel that pops in. That would be bizarre. At the beginning of your supplications, the command went out, and I have come to tell you, for you are greatly beloved. Therefore, consider the matter and understand the vision. Daniel, I want to give you understanding. It says this: 70 weeks are determined for your people and for your holy city to finish the transgression, make an end of sins, to make reconciliation for iniquity, to bring in everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy. I'm not going to get into all the details of verse 24, but at the end of 70 weeks, I'll define 70 weeks in just a minute. At the end of 70 weeks, the end of sin is going to come. At the end of the tribulation, all these things are going to come. We're going to march into the millennial kingdom. And this is for your peoples, for the Jews, right? Verse 25, know therefore and understand that from going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. The street shall be built again and the wall, even in troublesome times. Verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince who is to come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end of it shall be with the flood. Until the end of the war, desolations are determined. Then, verse 27, he shall confirm a covenant with many for 1 week, but in the middle of the week he shall bring an end to sacrifice and offering. And on the wing of abominations shall be one who makes desolate, even until the consummation which is determined is poured out on the desolate. So what on earth is going on here? What I want to do for a few minutes we have together is I want to define what the 70 weeks are, and I'm going to give you a little bit of info on the Antichrist and what it means for the Antichrist, who is the one that's going to confirm this covenant with Israel. But I believe it's a peace plan. I also want to show you why I believe it's a peace plan. I'll show you that in just a minute too. But there are many other peace plans that are already on the table, roadmaps to peace. There's a Saudi plan. There's a plan that the Pope has to bring Egypt into the picture, that Egypt would bring their military and ensure peace there in Jerusalem. Did you know that? And that's just been put out there recently. There were attempts by Condoleezza Rice and the George W. Bush administration to bring peace. There's also attempts by, as you know, John Kerry and the President Obama administration to bring peace. Remember how many times John Kerry has been to Jerusalem? And then there's the Oslo Peace Accords. President Clinton, right? And by the way, the Oslo Peace Accords are still on the table. Did you know that? And did you know it's a peace for land deal? swap land, give us peace. That's what it is. But the Oslo Peace Accords are still out there. Now, this is interesting to me. Here we are told in verse 27 that the Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many. Well, what does that mean? The word confirm comes from this Hebrew word, gabar, means to make strong, to give strength to. It does not mean to create or to originate. So it appears that there's already something on the table. Hence, could it be the Oslo Peace Accords that are already on the table? I don't know. This word, gabar, it also means to act proudly and to show oneself as mighty. Interesting, because the Antichrist is very proud and shows himself as being very mighty. But with that, we understand from this word gabar, this Hebrew word, he's going to confirm a covenant with many. It will be a confirmation of a covenant already in place, or this shows that this treaty is a significantly stronger peace treaty than any peace treaty in the past. It's one or the other. It's either one already on the table or one is coming that in and of itself it will be stronger. I want to also point out this to you regarding who the Antichrist is, because people get confused on it, all right? Understand this. The Antichrist is a man, or will be a man. How do you know it's not Hillary Clinton? I know it's not. Here's the deal. I mean, you know, okay, if Hillary becomes president, you know how many times I'm going to log on some websites and say, Hillary's the Antichrist. You spell out her name this way and it's 666. I know it's coming, right? I'm sure it's already out there. Hillary cannot be the Antichrist. Every time the Antichrist, by the way, the Antichrist is the name that we've ascribed to this. The beast is what Revelation calls him. But every time you see him, this being appear, it's always in the masculine form. Even here in Daniel, he, verse 27, shall confirm a covenant. It's always in the masculine form. It's not going to be a woman. It's not going to be Hillary Clinton, all right? So don't even have to bother going down that path. Also, the Antichrist is full of himself. Again, that word gabar, it means to proclaim oneself as being mighty, awesome. I'm it. I'm the one. In Daniel chapter 7, beginning in verse 24, the Bible says this, the 10 horns, it was Daniel's vision, part of another vision he had. The 10 horns are 10 kings who shall arise from this kingdom, the last kingdom, the revived Roman Empire. And another shall rise after them. He shall be different from the first ones and shall subdue 3 kings. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High, right? He's proclaiming himself as being mighty. Confirm, gabar. He shall prosecute the saints of the Most High and shall intend to change the times and the law. Intend to change them. Then the saints shall be given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time. Time, times, and half a time, Daniel chapter 7 is speaking of a time of 3.5 years, which is going to be significant, and I'll show you that in just a second. But as we look at the world scene right now, we are racing towards this covenant, verse 26 and 27, this covenant that the Antichrist is going to confirm with the many, and then break it at the midpoint of the tribulation. Those are pretty birds on your cell phone. I can hear them from here. Very soothing. That's really sweet. But you and I, we hear the final status talks about Jerusalem on a weekly basis. We even hear more about the talking of the rebuilding of a Jewish temple or the building of a Jewish temple on the Temple Mount than we've heard in previous generations. And we also hear a whole lot of happy talk, but in spite of all the happy talk that we're hearing, you know, whether it be President Obama saying we're strong, we're doing great, or Europe being deceived, or whatever it is, there's problems out there. There's wars. ISIS, now understand this. I want to show you this because there's a lot of confusion. ISIS publicly throws gay men off buildings, crucify thieves in Quranic death penalty. Understand this. I've heard so many people here in America say, you know, we need to just get along. Wait a minute. You know, it's the gay community needs to understand this is reality. right? It's the reality of what they're really about. These people are evil. And again, I'm not saying everybody who's Muslim is going to do this, but understand they're the radical Islamic jihadists. This is what they do, right? Then we have this, Nasrallah. Hezbollah says, Hezbollah is prepared for war deep into Israel beyond the Galilee. So there's these threats against Israel. Well, I thought there's going to be peace in Israel. It's coming. But right now, we ain't there yet. We're not there yet. I'll show you a few more things in just a minute. Hamas says Tel Aviv stabbing attack is a heroic act. You hear about the stabbing attack in Tel Aviv? I mean, it's been a crazy week. This stabbing attack in Tel Aviv and these things that happened over this past week and the week before, and I don't know how many people were stabbed. I think it was actually the week before. If you look at that, and you hear the talk, they're saying, well, the Jews are occupying Tel Aviv, occupied territory. Interesting. Let me just point out this to you, too. 9/11, the towers come down. Islam is allowed to go and build a religious shrine in that area, right? But the world is against Israel building a religious shrine in their own area that they own. Isn't that crazy? You look, you go, why is things so backwards? But that's another story. Let me show you this map. I've showed you this here before. Okay, here's Israel. Right. Can you guys see Israel on the map? You can if you're in the front row. If you're in the second row, here is Israel, right? There. Right there, that's Israel. And you have the whole world coming against Israel saying, they're an occupied land. Really? I mean, you look at that and you're going, wow, this is just crazy. That's all the Muslim people that they're surrounded by. And the media in the Western world promotes this. Man, let me tell you, it's garbage. It's just garbage as you look at the reality of what's really going on out there. It's a very strange thing when you look at the scene, why there's so much opposition to Israel and the Jews occupying the land that they own. It's like you own a house, you want to go live in it. Somebody says, no, I'm living here. And you're saying, well, that's not fair. And then they say, it is fair. In fact, you're occupying my land by just saying you own it, even though I live here. I mean, that's what's going on. Doesn't make any sense. But the most contentious issues for all parties in the Middle East is the final status of Jerusalem. But what concerns me as an American right now is the things that have been coming up this past week. So Obama Inner Circle threatens price to pay for Netanyahu's speech on Iran. I mentioned a little bit about this earlier this morning, if you were here this morning, but Congress invited Prime Minister Netanyahu to come and speak on the issue in Iran with their nuclear weapons in March. Hey, we've got a problem. It is a problem. The Saudis know it's a problem. Egypt knows it's a problem. Jordan knows. Everybody knows it's a problem except Europe and the United States of America. It's an interesting threat. There's a U.S. official who's quoted as saying, there are things you simply don't do, speaking of Netanyahu coming to Congress. Well, what the U.S. administration is saying is that Netanyahu has broken protocol. He's invited by Boehner to come and speak to Congress in March, and Netanyahu didn't call Obama and say, hey, I was invited, is that okay? Although other people have done it. But the whole administration, so we don't know who actually is saying it, but this is what this U.S. official said. Netanyahu spat in our face publicly, and that's no way to behave. Netanyahu ought to remember that President Obama has a year and a half left to his presidency, and that there will be a price, he said. Wow. And then I found this in the New York Post. I hope you don't take offense to this, but just listen to these words from the New York Post. This was today in the New York Post. It was a little bit of sarcasm. This writer said, how dare Israel be more concerned with the existential threat of Iranian nukes than with the present administration's feelings? Interesting, isn't it? Went on and said a lot more that I won't say publicly, but you can pull it up and read it yourself. But I find this alarming. There's another article, goes on to say Obama's allies feared Netanyahu's March trip could be used by Israel and by Republicans to rally opposition to a nuclear deal. Now listen to this, all right? You need to listen to this line. Here's the fear of the presidential administration and Europe. This is the fear of the Western world leadership. That by Netanyahu visiting Washington, speaking to Congress, could undercut years of sensitive negotiations just as they appear to bear fruit. And I'm watching the nuclear Iran thing. I am watching the decisions that the Western world has made. Paris has made these decisions to appease the enemy. It does not go well. We've seen it time and time again from the leadership in the Western world. And let me tell you, it is to sit here and say this is insane. This is nuts. What's the definition of insanity? Doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result? Right? Kind of like Groundhog Day or something like that, or whatever it is. So, I mean, if this is what seems to be happening. Do you understand? I'm not trying to throw everybody under the bus. Look, I'm concerned about our country. I'm concerned about the world. But at the same time, I know what the Bible says. And things are trucking along exactly as the Bible says. But when I see this coming out of Washington, I'm reminded of this, and this is the frightening part. God says, behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of drunkenness to all surrounding peoples when they lay siege against Judah and Jerusalem. And it shall happen in that day that I will make Jerusalem a very heavy stone for all peoples. All who would heave it away will surely be cut in pieces, though all nations of the earth are gathered against it. Wow. I'm looking at the world in the United States appearing to want to heave it away. God says, I'm going to cut you in pieces. So I'm concerned. Zechariah reveals that Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, as far as the Jews can see and as far as I can see, that Jerusalem will become a problem for all nations. Eventually, all nations of the world will gather against her. The voting of the UN, the recent polls in Europe, the comments of leaders in Islamic countries all indicate that we are entering a radical generation of global anti-Semitism that this world has never experienced before. Now, let me show you a few more things. Okay, this is the picture of the march of world leaders in Paris, and so this is just the world leaders themselves. So what you have here, this is the boss, right? President of Palestinian Authority, right? That's the boss. Angela Merkel from Germany. This is Netanyahu, right? So this is the picture that was all over the world news. And I find this interesting. I want you to understand this. There's really only two things world news talked about. This was it. Why was Benjamin Netanyahu here? In Paris. I find that strange. Did you see how small Israel was in the map I showed you a few minutes ago? And what Zechariah said? Jerusalem is it. Jerusalem will be a heavy stone. Why does the world care so much about that small, insignificant place? If there's Netanyahu, why does the world really care? Why do they take pictures of him? It was so upsetting to people. If France, the president of France was so upset that Netanyahu came there, his country just gets shot up by these radicals who are taking over France, and he's mad at this Jewish man who comes here. Let's appease the enemy. Throw him a little bit more steak. Maybe he'll quiet down that alligator. He won't bite off our arm. The one who appeases the enemy is just the last one to be eaten, but you're still going to get eaten. Actually, in Paris's way, they happen to be getting gobbled up rather fast. But you look at this. So the big news was Netanyahu was there. You know what the other news was? Obama wasn't there. I mean, those are the two big things. You look at this, and I just find it so interesting. But there's this major anti-Semitism. Netanyahu eyes Asian markets, cites anti-Israel mood in Europe. Anti-Israel mood in Europe. Better believe it. He's going, if they aren't going to buy my stuff, I'm going over to China. I'm going over to these Asian countries. They will buy Israeli goods, and they will. And Netanyahu's not stupid. So he understands that. It's a bigger market, too. Iran, what do they say? We will continue arming terrorists in Judea and Samaria. We're going to kill all the Jews. Iran escalates threats, vows to shower Israel with Shahab missiles. So we see all of this talk of killing the Jews. At the same time, we hear all this talk that everything is going in the right direction. There will be peace in Jerusalem. There will be peace in our time, but it appears that it's going to be a peace at any cost. But with that, I want to show you some things about this peace covenant, all right? And I've formed it in the form of questions that I'm going to ask because I believe they're questions that are relevant to you. But there is a problem. That was the longest introduction to a message I've ever had. We have exactly 3 minutes left. So this is what's going to happen. I'm going to go through the first one right now. I'm only going to be able to do the first one. Next Sunday, Super Bowl Sunday. If you love Jesus more than football, you'll be here. Do I know how to lay guilt on people? So anyways, nothing like pouring on the guilt. But I'm going to have to finish this next week, as you can tell. In fact, I'm not even going to get through the whole first question here. So here's the question. What is the meaning of the 70 weeks of Daniel? That's a problem, right? If you don't understand it, here's what I mean by that. What is the meaning of 70 weeks of Daniel? We just read where Daniel's told by the angel Gabriel, there will be a period of 70 weeks determined for your people, right? We just read that, we read about an hour ago in Daniel chapter 9. Well, 70 weeks is a period of 490 years. Now, if you're smart, you're thinking to yourself, 70 weeks is a period of about 1 year and 4 months. It is not a period of 490 years, right? I mean, it is, really, when we think of it. How many weeks are in a year? There's 52 weeks in a year. So how could 70 weeks be 490 years? It makes no sense. Well, I will explain it to you. Got to understand biblical terms, and we got to understand some things with the Hebrew mindset between God and his people. The 70 weeks spoken of, Daniel, 70 weeks, are sabbatical cycles. And by the way, just for a couple more minutes, is what I want you to do. Put your brain on, because you're going to need it, all right? I'm going to do my best to help you to understand this, but you guys are smart. You guys are very smart, and you get it, and that's why you're here on Sunday nights. But understand this. Since this prophecy was given to Daniel, a Jew, we must interpret it as a Jew would understand it. In Leviticus chapter 25, God instructed Israel to keep a sabbatical year calendar. So the Jews were to farm the land for 6 years. On the 7th year, they were to let it lay fallow, right? Let it rest. What was that called? One sabbatical week. It was a sabbatical week. But one sabbatical week is a period of 7 years. It's also known, if you've been studying Bible prophecy lately, Shemitah, because Rabbi Mark Biltz has made a big deal of the Shemitah. And what the Shemitah is, it's a sabbatical week or a period of 7 years. You farm the land for 6 years, and then you let it lay fallow for the 7th year. You let it lay still, rest the 7th year. Sabbatical is a sabbatical period, Leviticus chapter 25. But the reason this prophecy is given in weeks is to inform us that it is using a sabbatical calendar. Hence, it was 70 weeks of years, figuring each day of the 70 weeks as 1 year. All right? You guys tracking with me? This will be online. You'll be able to see it again. Now, the word for weeks that's used here is heptad, and it means a group of sevens. By the context, again, the Hebrew mindset, by the context that was given, it was meant as a group, as groups of 7 years or sabbatical weeks. Also note that Gabriel divides the 70 weeks. I'm going to divide them up, and then I'm going to end it after I divide these weeks up, all right? He divided them up. Look here at verse 25. Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah the Prince, there shall be 7 weeks and 62 62 weeks. And then he says this, the street shall be built again, and the wall, even in troublesome times. Verse 26, and after the 62 weeks, the Messiah will be cut off, but not for himself. What does it mean the Messiah is going to be cut off? We know it means he's going to be killed, but not for himself, right? Who's he cut off for? Us, right? Anybody who would believe in him, right? So we kind of got the New Testament connection. So we got somewhat of an understanding of it. But here, he still divides. He takes 70 weeks, and he says there's going to be 7 and 62. What's 7 and 62? 69, all right? 69 weeks. The 70th week is still missing. So but why does he say 7 weeks and 62 weeks? 7 plus 62 is 69 weeks, but the 7 weeks, it would be a 49-year period, right? 7 times 7, remember it's all sevens, 49 years. This 49-year period is the time where the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem was given. It would take 49 years to accomplish this. It began in 445 BC. Remember verse 25? That from the going forth of the command to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah, there would be 7 weeks and 62 weeks. All right. So the command's given, took 49 years to build it, but then it says there's going to be another 62 weeks, right? So you add that on. The 62 weeks is from the end point on the rebuilding of the walls. So after the 49 years are finished, after the wall's been rebuilt, from the end point on the rebuilding of the walls until Messiah was to be revealed, it would be 62 weeks or 434 years. 49 years plus 434 years is what? 483, right? So you have 483 years. Hence, what's the Great Tribulation? The 70th week of Daniel, it's a 7-year period. There's a total of 490. Remember that? 70 times 7, 490. That's why we still have the 7 years, the 7-year tribulation period, or the 70th week of Daniel. The 70th week, what is it? This 7-year period is yet future because God stopped the time clock when Israel rejected the Messiah and he went to the cross. All right, now let me say this. Almost done with this section, and then you get to go eat or whatever you want to do. There's a lot of different math that scholars have done over the years. Sir Robert Anderson, amongst many others. And it's said you can calculate exactly using not the Gregorian calendar that we have, but the Babylonian calendar, and you count the days to restore and build Jerusalem until the Messiah comes. And they will say, we know the exact date that Jesus rode into Jerusalem on a donkey on Palm Sunday based on this prophecy from Daniel. Now, I've been studying Bible prophecy for a long time, so I've read Sir Robert Anderson's work. I've read a lot of others who have said, no, he's wrong, I'm right, and they're off. He's off by 3 years, but I'm the one who's a genius. Somebody else comes along and says, no, I'm the one who's a genius. They're both wrong. I've got it right because this is actually 6 months here. Whatever, this is what I say. God's right. And I don't know exactly, this is what I don't know. I do not know exactly the day that Jesus was born. I do not know exactly the day that he was crucified. I do not know that, right? But I do know this. God tells us, after 483 years, 7 plus 62, what would happen? The Messiah would be cut off. So I'm confident, however you want to do the math, when it comes down to it, either this was fulfilled on the day that Jesus was crucified and died, or it was fulfilled, as many say, the day he rode into Jerusalem on Palm Sunday, whenever that was. But God tells us here, listen, after the 483 years, tells us right here, the Messiah shall be cut off, but not for himself. All right, it's done. But God stopped the time clock when Israel rejected the Messiah and he went to the cross. So you have the whole 69 weeks, 483 years. The Messiah is cut off. The time clock is stopped. Until the prince comes, verse 26, 27. Until the prince comes, the prince who comes from the people who destroyed the city. Who destroyed the city? Talking about Jerusalem, right? That's the Romans, right? Destroyed it under the leadership of Titus in 70 AD. This is why you hear prophecy speakers say the prince to come, the Antichrist, the beast, is coming out of a revived Roman Empire, because in Daniel he's very clear, he will rise up out of the people who destroyed the city, destroyed by the Romans in 70 AD. What will he do? It tells us here, he's going to confirm, make strong a covenant, and he's going to break it at the midway period. But this covenant, it's a 7-year covenant. It is the period that lasts for the sabbatical week, the final 7-year period of the time as we know it. The time as we know it. But with that, understand this. When you look at the Jews, it's like God stopped the clock on Israel when the Messiah was cut off, and we live in the time of the Gentiles. This is the last thing. We live in the time of the Gentiles. How do we know that? Because the Bible tells us. That's what the Bible tells us. Romans chapter 11. By the way, a lot of people say that the church has replaced Israel. That is not what the Bible says. This is what the Bible says. For Paul, the apostle writes, "For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, that blindness in part has happened to Israel." You talk to a lot of Jews. Man, you can show them Messiah, Yeshua from the Bible. You can show them from the Passover and all these things. And it's like the blinders are there, right? Blindness in part has happened to Israel. And there's many Jews that are getting saved right now too. But blindness in part has happened to Israel. Until what? Until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. That tells us there's a time until the fullness of the Gentiles is coming. And so all Israel will be saved, speaking about afterwards. The deliverer will come out of Zion, and he will turn away ungodliness from Jacob. And what? And for this is my covenant with Israel when I take away their sins. God is not done with Israel. God is not done with Israel. But we're going back to here. Thank you. There's a time of the fullness of Gentiles. I believe that we are rapidly approaching that time. When that is ended, it all begins when there's a confirmation of a covenant with the Antichrist. Now, I do want to say this. We'll pick it up here next time. A lot of people think, well, Pastor Tom, doesn't the tribulation begin when the rapture of the church takes place? No, it does not. What? The tribulation begins when the confirmation, when the covenant is confirmed. The final 70th week of Daniel, the final 7-year period. This is crucial to understand what the whole 69 and 1 is, to understand that God is talking about and dealing with the people of Israel. Hence, when you go back to verse 24, 70 weeks are determined for who? For your holy people, God says, and your holy city. Talking about the Jews and Jerusalem. The 70th week is about the Jews and Jerusalem. That is why people like me believe there will be a rapture that takes place. The time of the Gentiles will be filled. God starts working and moving among the Jews again. It's during the 70th week, the 7-year period, that the 144,000 Jews are saved, that are as radical as the Apostle Paul was. And they are proclaiming the Gospels during that time. But with that, that's where I'm going to pick it up next week.